heart of where innovation, money, and power collide in Silicon Valley and beyond. This is Bloomberg Technology with Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow.
Live from New York and San Francisco, this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Apple and Google losing multi-billion-dollar court fights with the European Union.
Plus, shares of Oracle touch a fresh record high on strong demand for AI products.
Meanwhile, Apple bets big on AI, unveiling a new line of products centered around Apple Intelligence. But first, let's check on the markets. And while it is Apple that we're going to dive in on a macro perspective, Ed, and maybe tugs the NASDAQ more broadly off of its highs, we're up 1.5% over the last 2 trading days. But most of those gains are from yesterday. Today, we are calling some of that risk-on sentiment, and some of the most focus is on some of the individual movers, and you're going to dive into it.
Yeah, Apple and Alphabet, the parent of Google, two court fights lost with the EU, but the stock telling 2 different stories. Apple is lower, Alphabet, the parent of Google, modestly higher actually at the kind of low point of the session. A $14.4 billion decision in back taxes essentially for Apple, and it's a fine for Google in the fight with the European Union. EU Competition Commissioner Margaret Vestager, who ends her term in November, says the rulings brought her to tears. Listen to this.
You, of course, own your victories, but you also own your defeats. And we've had both. And hopefully that shows that we're willing to push the envelopes, also sometimes to take a risk in order to try to make sure that the market serves the consumer. And that we are not just small pawns or meat for the machine.
I think Vestager has long maintained this idea that an individual member state should not make an ad hoc beneficial tax arrangement with a specific company like Apple. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Jennifer Duggan out of Dublin for more. And this relates to a historic series of events in Ireland, back taxes essentially. Just explain the basics of the EU ruling in Apple's case.
Hi, yeah, the case relates to tax, Apple's tax that was paid in Ireland back in the 1990s and early 2000s. Under the ruling today, the European Court ruled that Apple hadn't paid enough tax and that Ireland had granted Apple state aid in relation to its presence in Ireland. So that tax will now need to be paid in Ireland.
Just to remind us more broadly of Ireland's view on taxes of old and why it is embroiled in this way with Apple.
Well, back in the early 1990s, Ireland had wanted to make itself an attractive place for foreign direct investment, and it had a lower corporation tax rate as part of those efforts. Since then, there was a lot of accusations at the time of Ireland that Ireland had become a tax haven. There were some tax loops, essentially, one in particular that was known as the double Irish. Those have, in the past 10, 15 years, those have essentially been closed off, and Ireland is now subject to, has signed up to OECD rules on global taxation, and it now has a 15% corporation tax rate. So those situations have changed, but at the time back in this refers to a very specific period back in the 1990s and 2000s.
Apple has some cash spare, luckily, but is a huge amount to be paying in back taxes. Jennifer Duggan, live from Ireland, we thank you very much. Apple, in fact, though, introduced the latest version of its flagship product just yesterday, the iPhone 16. CEO Tim Cook saying it was built for AI, quote, from the ground up. Mark Gurman has had a little under 24 hours to digest. You knew most of it coming ahead of the game, Mark. Is it going to be AI that makes everyone buy a new iPhone?
Well, it's interesting because Apple Intelligence isn't, as we've discussed many times, isn't going to be released until mid-October at the earliest, and these phones begin shipping on September 20th. But AI is where the marketing message is at right now. AI is what Wall Street is interested in right now. AI has been on the minds of consumers for the past several months, so that is where Apple is focusing its messaging for these new devices. In my view, what's really going to spur upgrades are people who are on older phones, whether that's the 14, the 13, 12, 11, or earlier, People who have a completely drained battery, people who have a cracked screen, people who want those nice camera upgrades, it's not really going to be the AI that's pushing these sales. It's going to be the other factors.
I think, Mark, you had access to iOS 18.1 beta version, right? And yesterday I was able to get hands-on with 16 Plus, Pro and Pro Max. And the early functionality is like quite limited. Text summarization, auto response in email. There is some pretty cool image editing stuff, you know, in the version that I was able to access. But you seem to have detail as well about what happens next, a series of updates and more functionality that's perhaps at the cutting edge.
Yeah, that's right. So in 18.1, that's going to be the first version that includes Apple Intelligence. Like you said, that's going to include summarization. That's going to include phone call recording and provide you a transcription afterwards. It's going to include voice memo transcriptions. It's going to include notification summarization, notification prioritization within the Mail app. And then you have 18.2 coming in December. That's going to include things like ChatGPT integration from OpenAI. It's going to include Genmoji, where you can use text to create your own emojis. It's going to include an image playground app for generative image creation. There's an updated interface for auto email categorization within the Mail app. There's general notification prioritization across the system on your lock screen. So more bells and whistles there. But the real thing that people think about when you think about AI is Siri. And right now, Siri has an updated interface on these newer phones when you're running Apple Intelligence. But truth be told, that's just lipstick, right? Because the reality is that the underpinnings of Siri really haven't changed. And Siri is not going to change in any meaningful way until it gets its own sort of brain transplant, so to speak, in March, April of next year. That's when Siri is going to be able to do things like pull up when my mom's flight lands, or what is the podcast that my wife sent me 2 weeks ago, right? That's the deeper integration and in-app actions that people have been waiting for. That's probably 4 to 6 months away still.
Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, an honor to be live blogging with you in the trenches of you going through pretty much every piece of product announcement that you had nailed in advance anyway. Really strong reporting. Thank you very much. I'll just point out one thing as well that we posted in the blog that you take for granted, but best ever battery life, most powerful processor. These are things that people are interested in, and there's a lot more than the iPhone. Let's keep it going with Maribel Lopez, principal analyst at Lopez Research. And, you know, in aggregate, what was there to be excited about across the product portfolio for you, Maribel?
I think in many ways we saw exactly the predictable hardware innovations that you would always see with a smartphone launch. We talked about a better camera. We talked about less bezel, so a bigger screen. With the watch, we talked about thinner, lighter. I think for consumers that are coming into these new phones that need to do upgrades, the concept of having the camera button and the visual intelligence was really interesting. Really what sells phones with consumers continues to be the visual aspects. How's the camera? What can we do with photos? What can we do with videos? And we saw a strong showing on that. I think some of the surprises were around things like the health features that they added with sleep apnea and hearing aids. So it was actually in some ways predictable with a few surprises that really focus on usability.
I think that health focus is an interesting one, Maribel, but give us your take on artificial intelligence and Apple Intelligence. Is that going to be a winning formula if it's not actually here to use right yet?
Well, first of all, I think the concept that it's not here until December or Q1 of next year being a big deal is really overplayed. In general, most consumers are not going out and saying, what I really want right now is artificial intelligence, right? What they want is they want things to be easier to use. They want to be able to capture better visuals, do better sharing, express themselves in different ways. And I think that Apple took a very tempered approach to what artificial intelligence means and really tried to tie it to those things that they thought consumers would find important. So not just artificial intelligence for artificial intelligence sake, but something that's going to make your life better. They talked about personalization and context and how to create videos easier and how to do emojis. So I think these are things that resonate with consumers. And the timing of that, it'll come to them, they'll use it, but they're not knocking the doors down for it right now. What they want is they want a phone or a watch that's going to be able to run whatever comes next from Apple.
ambient AI is how a guest put it yesterday, just naturally doing it all in the background. Maribel, go back then to the watches and the AirPods. It did have quite an impact on certain stocks, certainly hearing aid makers at one point in the trade. How much are people going to be spurred to buy this on a health focus?
So I don't know if they're necessarily going to buy it on the health focus. What I think is really going to happen and what the real win is for Apple is the concept of the continuous upgrade cycle. Once I get that AirPod in, I figured out that I have a hearing issue or that I can have better quality hearing with this. I think that's a game changer in terms of continual use and constant upgrades. I do think it's an issue for the hearing aid manufacturers. I mean, one of the things that we've always had an issue with is, do people want to feel like they're wearing health devices? These are just AirPods, right? Nobody knows if it's a hearing aid or not. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. I also just find the usability. Think about not needing to change a battery as an elderly person. You just have easy charging capability. I think it could be a huge win for people that need to have better hearing.
Maribel, it was interesting that inside the Steve Jobs Theatre, the most audible sort of gasps and excitement was around watch and AirPods, in part specifically sleep apnea and hearing aid. We talk about wearables as kind of the jumping in point because actually the hardware costs less than the smartphone and lowers the barrier to entry. How do you model that for the success of Apple's ecosystem?
So when I think about Apple, it is a portfolio approach, right? You have a phone, you have a smart device, but I think the real win for Apple, what they're very good at is that all these things work together, and the more of them you have, the better your life becomes. And I think they really tried to auger in on, we can help you with your health, we can help you with fitness, we can help you with problems that you didn't even know you had, and all of that's attached to the personalization of you and kind of taking what we talked about as that AI, and really trying to make that AI relevant in someone's life. So I think moving forward, we're going to continue to see that the health market is going to be one of the drivers for Apple revenue moving forward.
A lot of this was about what's inside of the Apple iPhone, because it hasn't changed that much ostensibly from the outside. What has changed on the outside is what's going on in China. Huawei, we see a trifold phone. How much are we seeing innovation from a hardware perspective coming from China?
We actually see quite a bit of innovation coming from China. What I think is very interesting is that Apple continues to have the perspective that the foldable phone is not something that they need to participate in. Clearly, a trifold phone is an innovation. The timing of the Huawei launch was really important to try to create some of that fear and uncertainty in Apple's presence in China. And I actually think it accomplished that. But the reality of the situation is foldable devices are very expensive. It's been a limited market for some time. Samsung's been pushing that rock up the hill for quite a while, and it has also not made that break. So it makes perfect sense to me if you're looking at a mainstream market that foldability isn't going to be where it's at. But if you want to talk tech factor cool, foldability is absolutely that.
Maribel Lopez, Principal Analyst at Lopez Research. Wonderful take, thank you. Coming up, we're going to be joined by Rubrik CEO Vipul Sinha for a conversation on the firm's earnings. Doubts around growth in the second half, is that what's pulling the shares lower? This is Bloomberg Technology.
Two notable calls from the sell side this morning. First up, D.A. Davidson initiating coverage on Alphabet with a neutral recommendation. The analyst highlighting numerous headwinds within the company's core search business. And our second call comes from Deutsche Bank naming Tesla its top pick within the auto sector, noting that shares deserve a unique valuation given its potential to reshape business models across multiple industries. Karen.
Let's have another stock that we should be looking at. Rubrik, posting a 35% gain in revenue, raising full-year guidance, yet shares are off 6%. Joining us now to dive in is Rubrik CEO Vipul Sinha, who, must be looking at the stock with some surprise. You've got analysts such as Guggenheim saying that you significantly outperformed on all key metrics, but Bloomberg Intelligence, they're flagging perhaps some questions around growth dynamics in the second half. Can you speak to that?
Thank you, Caroline, for this opportunity. Look, I leave this talk to the expert, but we are building a long-term business. And if you look at the growth in a very important market that is cyber resilience, we grew 40% year over year on our subscription ARR to over 900 million. I mean, we are growing at this speed, at that scale. And last quarter, we beat the quarter handsomely. Q2, then quarter before we beat the quarter handsomely. We are continuing to outperform both on top line and our profitability metrics. And this quarter, we also raised the guidance for the rest of the year. So we are very bullish about what is in front of us. We are confident in our execution, what we see, and we'll finish our year strong.
People, in the context of like what Rubrik actually does, it seems like when enterprises invest more in cloud or shift to the cloud, there's a benefit that you derive from that. Could you explain the basics of that relationship and those mechanics?
As more and more businesses and governments have realized that just doing cyber prevention will not allow them to run their business when there is a successful cyber attack, because cyber attacks are inevitable, they are all thinking about cyber resilience. How do they continue to run their business even in presence of attacks? How do hospitals continue to admit patients? Banks continue to dole out money? And that's what we do. We help businesses ensure that their applications are running. And applications could be in their enterprise, could be in the SaaS, could be in the cloud. And as businesses are doing more digital transformation to gain productivity, cyber is the number one risk. And ability to run their services all the time, irrespective of successful cyber attack, is what we help the businesses with. So more cloud transformation, more SaaS adoption, more digital transformation is actually helping our business.
People, switching gears slightly, I think we asked you, let's say, a dozen times over the course of a year when you were going to go public. And eventually it happened, and I feel like it all happened quite fast. So I just wanted to ask what it's like being a public company and how that you think that's going.
It's going great as a public company, but for me as a CEO, there is no real difference other than reporting to public market and doing callbacks with our stakeholders, because from the day one of the company, we wanted to build a long-term company, a company that lasts longer than my own professional career and life. And there is no difference in terms of how we build our product, how we think about the next chapter of Rubrik. We are coming up on $1 billion that we actually guided to. I'm thinking about how do we go to 3 billion and beyond? What are the product configuration that we do today so that we have high acceleration 3-4 years down the line? That's how we think as a business, and there's no real change in how we operate our business.
Since you've gone public, though, we had the most major global IT outage, and everyone started thinking about resiliency all over again. Now, today, in fact, I think Microsoft is currently hosting a cybersecurity summit for the first time since that outage, with government participation to really get their learnings. People, how many customers did you suddenly sign from that event? How have you seen the market shift after it?
It was an unfortunate event, but it actually previewed what a real cyber attack could do to our digital interconnected global economy. And it really, as you mentioned, brought the discussion of resilience at the top. And so we are seeing a lot of CIOs and board of directors and CISOs and CEOs having this conversation that how do we keep our businesses up and running irrespective of what happens. So we are definitely seeing anecdotal evidence of like a renewed interest, renewed focus. And cyber resilience is the number one topic in cybersecurity. But it is one of the many factors. And over time, it will be clear how much impacts it does to actual like demand and top line.
People, very simply, did you get invited to this summit that Microsoft's hosting, and what are you hearing about it?
We have a great partnership with Microsoft. In fact, they gave us Healthcare Partner of the Year because we are really going after protect the unprotected, which is the healthcare segment of the market. And obviously, Microsoft is very serious about cybersecurity. If you look at the number of initiatives that they are doing, number of partnerships that we are creating with Microsoft, where we are bringing the cyber resilience, they are bringing the cloud and infrastructure security, and together we are delivering end-to-end security. So as far as Microsoft is concerned, our partnership around security is very strong, and they are quite serious about it.
What about global growth more broadly, Bipul, and where are you seeing CEOs, CISOs willing to spend at this moment?
So I was in Asia 3-4 weeks ago, and I spent almost a week in Japan. And if you look at a country like Japan, which is a large industrial economy, they are also undertaking digital transformation because they want to gain productivity. They want to have this whole digital movement for themselves. And the number one concern for their digital transformation is cybersecurity. Because in a manufacturing oriented economy, if you have digital disruption because of cyber attacks, I mean, the whole economy could come to a standstill, or the whole company could come to a standstill. So folks are very serious about investing in cybersecurity, particularly around cyber resilience, because they have done a lot of investment in prevention of attack, but they are not able to prevent the unpreventable. So the focus is, how do I keep my services up and running? How do I ensure that I confidently do digital transformation and more?
Rubrik CEO Bipul Singh, it's great to have you back here on Bloomberg Technology. Thank you very much. Time for Talking Tech, and first up, Amazon's Audible is set to begin selecting US-based narrators to help train AI of their own voices. The company plans to use cloned voices to quickly and cheaply increase their audiobook offerings. Amazon currently offers the option for self-published authors to use a generic virtual voice narration for their works. Plus, shares of Alibaba rising in Hong Kong trading. This is the e-commerce giant made its stock debut to investors from mainland China for the first time. Shares of Alibaba were added to the Stock Connect program that links Shanghai and Shenzhen with the Hong Kong exchange. The stock rose 4.2%, the most since August 16. And a sigh of relief for AI investors. TSMC revenue rose 33% in August, with sales reaching $7.8 billion. Taiwan's largest company now making more than half of its revenue from high-performance computing driven by AI demand. For the third quarter, analysts expect TSMC's revenue to grow 37%. Kara.
Let's just check in some stocks again. And Ed, you referenced this earlier. Tesla having a very good day, one of the biggest points to the higher side for the NASDAQ. Deutsche Bank naming the EV maker its top pick with auto sector. Also, Ed, interestingly, the EU maybe actually reducing those tariffs on Teslas and other EVs from China. Interesting as we get that news on Google and Apple from the EU today.
And I'd also point out it's 30 days until Robotaxi Day, and Elon Musk, if you're watching, I'm still waiting on my invite.
LA, here you come. Coming up, it's the first ever private spacewalk mission for SpaceX. We'll have all the details on today's launch. That's next. This is Bloomberg Technology. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde in New York.
And I'm Ed Ludlow in San Francisco.
Quick check on these markets for you, Ed, because we're trying to remain risk on, it would feel, on the day. We're up 0.5%, let's call it, on the NASDAQ 100 after, remember, a decent, more than 1 percentage point gain yesterday. So riding high, even though we got the anxiety of an inflation print and, of course, a presidential debate that comes later tonight. The 10-year yield, though, getting a bid. Maybe there is some anxiety, and we're wanting to get into some of these, well, more haven trades that is the bond market. Despite we've got some auctions coming up, we're down some 3-4 basis points, let's call it, on the 10-year. I'm looking at Bitcoin, just catching a slight bid up 0.2%. It's been a bit volatile on the day. Move on and have a look at the individual movers, because it's a day of micro news today. Apple dragged lower off of its lows, but still trading 0.3% to the downside. After, well, we're still wondering what Apple Intelligence really comes and what it means for sales of the new iPhone 16. But it loses that fight it had with the EU over a more than $14 billion tax debt that they owe. Of course, they have preferential treatment coming from Ireland. EU says we still want that money. Look, Bloomberg Intelligence, other analysts saying this isn't going to affect the business from a fundamental business, one of the few ones that could afford it. But Google also loses its fight, and more than $2 billion in terms of exerting its power, it would seem, when it comes to e-commerce and its own search platform. And look, once again, maybe it's owing. They're both disappointed, we understand. Let's have a look at Oracle, though. Record high for the stock, up more than, well, let's call it 12% now. AI, a driving force in terms of cloud. What are you watching, Ed?
Well, earlier today, SpaceX launched a rocket carrying 4 private astronauts to space.
Copy 1 Alpha.
Vehicle pitching downrange.
Flying crew on board Dragon and Falcon 9 to new heights.
all part of a groundbreaking mission aimed at performing the world's first commercial spacewalk. After a number of days of delay, Caro, the Polaris Dawn mission is underway.
Jared Isaacman, billionaire, happens to run a company, also now in space, it would seem. Just remind us why the spacewalk is so groundbreaking.
Yeah, I think that it just hasn't been done before. And the point of Jared's ambition to go back to space, because remember, he was part of the Inspiration 4 crew, is he is this adrenaline junkie billionaire. He is bankrolling this thing in partnership with SpaceX. He's fascinated by pushing the boundary of technology, but also sort of humankind's achievements in space. I'd also point out, like, he's not alone up there. He's with Sarah Gillis and Anna Mennon, two very senior SpaceX engineers who go as mission specialist and medical officer, respectively. On the right, Scott Petit, mission pilot, is Jared's best friend, essentially, another adrenaline junkie and fighter jet pilot.
And Sarah and Jared, they're the ones that are going to open the hatch, walk on out, and make history, ultimately.
What's different about this spacewalk is not just the sort of altitude that they'll do it at, but also the mechanism. So I think we're kind of used to historic pictures of spacewalks on the outside of the ISS where they have a airlock and they're tethered up. This time they'll be tethered up, but the only way to do it inside the Dragon capsule is to open up the hatch. So it means that the two of them will go out one by one, but there'll be a vacuum inside the capsule itself, meaning that the other two who are not doing the spacewalk also have to sort of don these specialist suits and just sit in there floating in a vacuum. And then when the two return, hopefully they close the hatch, repressurize and add oxygen to the chamber, and all being well and equal, they'll come home.
Let's hope. Now we want to turn from one race, the space race, to another one, to the White House. Presidential nominees Kamala Harris, of course, VP, and Donald Trump are set to debate on the stage later tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern. For more, let's bring in Kaylee Lines, who joins us. And Kaylee, technology show. Is it corporate tax for us? Is it, the focus on innovation? Anything you think we might get?
Well, you could get some on innovation. Investing in U.S. innovation is actually something both of these campaigns have talked about. There is a whole segment in that regard on Kamala Harris's policy page, the issues page on her website. So you could get some of that. Donald Trump may even bring crypto into the conversation, as he has been talking about that more and more, given the money the crypto industry is throwing into this election cycle. He wants to make America the crypto capital of the world, he says. But for business as a whole, beyond just technology, they, of course, will be affected by things like taxes, too. Kamala Harris obviously wants to raise the corporate tax rate to 28%. She also wants to lift to 28% the tax on long-term capital gains for those making over $1 million. She, of course, hasn't specifically said anything about unrealized capital gains, although Donald Trump has accused her of that. It is true. Her campaign initially said it supported a number of policy ideas in the President Biden's last budget proposal, which included a tax on unrealized capital gains for those making over $100 million a year who had less than 25% tax rate on their income. But she hasn't outright said that. That is not on her policy platform. And of course, she wants to raise taxes on regular capital gains for those making over $1 million and help to fund some of her other initiatives, including down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and no tax on tips, that kind of thing. Donald Trump, of course, wants to cut the corporate tax rate for companies that make things in America down to 15%, and also wants to make permanent his 2017 tax cuts. All of those proposals are estimated to cost about $10.5 trillion over the next 10 years, and there just simply isn't enough non-defense discretionary spending projected over the next 10 years to pay for that.
And he also wants to cut government spending or make it more efficient with the help of one Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Kaylee, in my more limited experience of presidential debates, having only lived in this country since 2018, the news cycle also kind of informs what they'll discuss. Sometimes you have the idea of a sovereign wealth fund in the headlines, and you've kind of outlined crypto. Just, is there a set stage of what will be asked and the key battleground?
Well, no questions have actually been told of the candidates or to us. ABC and those moderators are keeping them close to the chest. That is part of the rules for this debate, including, of course, the rule that the microphone will be off for the candidate whose turn it is not to speak, which will be an interesting dynamic there. But yeah, you're right. News does indeed drive questioning often on the sovereign wealth fund. We're getting that, frankly, from both the Democrat and Republican sides of the aisle. First, Donald Trump floated a U.S. sovereign wealth fund at the Economic Club of New York last week. Then Bloomberg reported just a day later that this is actually something that Biden aides, including Jake Sullivan, have also been pursuing. That is a question of how exactly that would be funded. We don't know those details yet. Donald Trump has suggested it could be funded and perhaps by tariffs. And tariffs, of course, is another thing we expect could come up on the stage tonight, as Donald Trump has floated a blanket tariff on all U.S. imports, potentially of 10% and even higher tariffs on China. And China, of course, gets us to the foreign policy aspects that could be present in this debate as well, not just on China, but the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. And of course, perhaps most difficultly for Kamala Harris in particular, as the vice president of this Biden administration, could be questions around Israel and the ongoing war in Gaza. And of course, here domestically, it's the economy, always.
Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lyons, thank you very much.
Time now for our VC Roundup. First up, Singapore-based firm Genesis Alternative Ventures, a private lender to venture and growth stage companies, has closed its second debt fund. And the lower end of its target, that's as global investors remain somewhat cautious about Southeast Asia's startup industry. And the firm has raised $125 million for the fund, securing new investors, including Japan's Mizuho Bank and Israel's Our Crowd. Plus, Atomico, it's a London-based venture firm that has backed fintech darlings Stripe and Klarna. It's raised $1.24 billion for two new funds. The dual fund strategy includes its first dedicated arm for growth capital and acts as a response to a dearth of late-stage technology financing in Europe, according to the firm's CEO. And Exowatt is a startup backed by OpenAI's Sam Altman, just launched a modular system to generate, store, and dispatch clean energy to data centers. Though the startup is relatively new, it already has a demand backlog of some 1.2 gigawatts from some of the world's largest data center operators and wind and solar developers. Ed.
Another story, Laravel, an open source startup in Arkansas, just raised $57 million from Excel. An Excel partner, Mars Clements, who led this investment, joins us here in San Francisco. Curiously enough, I've got a bit of experience covering tech in Arkansas. I've spoken a lot with Stuart Walton and the Up partnership, who kind of want it to be a tech hub. I was surprised to see the headline. Tell me about the round and a bit about the company and also the state.
Yeah, sure thing. So the accent was not a dead giveaway for Little Rock, Arkansas, but I'm glad to know that you've spent time in that tech ecosystem too. Laravel is an exceptional company founded by a really generational founder, Taylor Otwell. And the fact that it's in Little Rock, the fact that it is bootstrapped and profitable, and really a company that controls its own destiny is entirely consistent with what our growth investing strategy is at Excel and has been for 16 years.
All right, Miles, I'll bite. Bootstraps and profitable. Definition, explanation?
Yeah, sure thing. So we have this kind of peculiar growth investing strategy which fits in with Excel's strategy that we have deployed for 40 years across all of our firm, which is that at the most fundamental level, we want to be the first partner that founders turn to when they go to raise capital. Now, doing that requires a certain degree of flexibility. Some companies want to raise $1 million in the heart of San Francisco in a seed round. Other companies want to raise a $57 million bootstrap Series A, as was the case with Taylor and Little Rock. Or I would point to a company like 1Password, which raised a $200 million Series A in Toronto, which my partner Arun Matthew led a couple of years ago.
1Password might see competition coming from, well, a pretty age-old firm favorite of Silicon Valley, that is Apple. How are you seeing competition coming from the huge publicly traded companies, and can there still be room for these startups?
Absolutely. I mean, the technology industry today is so humbling. There are so many great incumbents. There's so many great startups. You're seeing companies move at warp speed with the assistance of AI. But with that said, the companies that we really have built our growth practice around are just growing durably, sustainably, profitably at kind of a different cadence. And it's a cadence of growth and a discipline that we really, really appreciate and that we seek out when we spend time in geographies like Toronto with 1Password, Sydney, Australia with Atlassian, Provo, Utah with Qualtrics, et cetera. So we're humbled. We're always sort of paranoid and aware of the competition out there. But we think these companies are special in their ability to be durable and compound for decades at a time.
It's interesting about open source, and we had Chai Discovery on yesterday, just raised around that sort of open source large language model, particularly around biotech. Now, when you're thinking about the open source area, you just mentioned AI. We think about open source a lot with AI, but you're actually talking about open source to build full stack web applications when it comes to Laravel. What is the business model there? Because interestingly, Chai Discovery didn't talk about how they're going to monetize. How already is Laravel Cloud monetizing?
Right. Well, the thing that we love about open source, whether it is biotech and pharma or developer tooling, is that they tend to be rooted in these vibrant, organic ecosystems. And if you are loyal and faithful to the ecosystem, if you serve your company, your customers and end users well over time, I think the best open source software companies in the world have demonstrated this win-win capability of monetizing, where you can build this revenue flywheel, but I think the best companies in open source invest the profits back into the ecosystem. They invest the profits back into enhancing the product roadmap, and that is exactly what Taylor wants to do with this capital that he's raised from Excel.
57 million. You've also backed Vercel and Sentry, so not unaccustomed to the open source area. Miles Clements, Accel partner. Thanks for joining us today. Shares of Oracle, all-time highs today. That's as artificial intelligence demand continues to boost its cloud computing business. And there's some new agreements being made, for example, with Amazon Web Services. Bloomberg Intelligence senior analyst Anurag Rana joins us some more, and Oracle managing to really focus on this new area of growth.
Yeah, think of this as the downstream effect on all the NVIDIA sales that you're seeing, because at the end of the day, it's these cloud providers that are buying those GPUs and then in turn offering those services to clients to experiment on Gen AI, to run new workloads, and that's really where Oracle is getting a lot of that bump. Not to mention the brand new deal that they have with AWS.
Well, let's jump on it. I don't understand the deal with AWS. I thought that for a long time they had some pretty frosty relations. Where does that work? And also there's this debate about on-prem versus not on-prem, which is a big part of Oracle's history, right?
Yeah, no, I was surprised to see this particular deal. I mean, I would say a year ago, I was surprised to see them do a deal with Microsoft and then again with Google. So a couple of things are happening over here. If I run an on-premise application, it was theoretically possible for me to take that application out from my data center, move it to AWS, and at the same time run an Oracle database on it. It can be done, but it was expensive. So Oracle was trying to say, well, if you want to run an application, why don't you come to my cloud, which is the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure? And that has been the friction. At the same time, people want to train on the data that resides on the Oracle database. So Oracle's figured out one thing, that the end demand is so wide that they won't mind, losing a little bit of money on one side or the other. In the net, it will actually be beneficial for them if more of their databases move to the cloud. So I think for Oracle, this may be actually helpful for their database business down the road. And given the shortage of workloads out there, I think they have enough you could say in the pipeline that for the next couple of years, you're not going to have a problem in terms of their cloud growth rate.
Anurag Rana of Bloomberg Intelligence, thank you. That was the analysis. Let's get the take from one of the companies involved in bringing Ruba Borno, VP of Worldwide Channels and Alliances at AWS. And I'd love to start, Ruba, by just simply asking how this deal and how this relationship with Oracle came about.
Thank you for having me, Ed. It's great to be here. We always work backwards from our customers. And just like Anurag said, the pace of innovation is accelerating. And with generative AI, our customers want to be able to take advantage of their biggest assets, which is their data. That's their differentiation. And so with this partnership, we're announcing that customers can move their data seamlessly from Oracle database at AWS to AWS in order to be able to take advantage of their assets and innovate at the pace that's required today.
Ruba, what do you make of perhaps Anurag's take that this was surprising? There is sort of frenemies going on at the moment. What is it like working alongside Oracle?
We've actually been working alongside them for a very long time. In fact, we've had joint customers with Oracle since 2008. So our focus has always been working backwards from the customer. It's in our DNA. And the time was right for us to bring this offer to our customers as they're thinking about how to transform their businesses. They want to move faster. They want to be able to take the data that they have stored in Oracle and be able to take advantage of AWS's large offerings of services like Amazon Q, Amazon Bedrock, the other services that they've gotten accustomed to. And that made it the time right now for us to work together. So it's not new. We've been doing it for a long time, but it became a lot more urgent to support our customers on their transformations.
Ruba, we got a lot of questions from our Bloomberg Technology audience that have a relationship with either AWS, Oracle, or both. And they're very simple. Like, how does this work in practice? Is there revenue split or revenue sharing? What are the obligations that the customer has to sign up to?
Well, we're not sharing our own commercial terms between AWS and Oracle, but from a customer perspective, this is a great opportunity for customers to leverage this service. They've got their existing relationship with Oracle, their existing relationship with AWS. When we launch it later this year, we'll provide all of that information to our customers, but it should be just as seamless. It'll be single billing through their AWS console, the same way they subscribe to any services from AWS.
Your very title, Ruba, is alliances. Is this a new world of alliances at the moment as people search out compute, as they work within operators? Are you seeing that more and more globally speaking?
I think that we've been seeing it for a long time. AWS has the largest cloud native partner network in the world. And we've had that because it is in our ethos to provide our customers with choice and provide them with simplicity so that they can run their businesses as seamlessly as possible and innovate not just through AWS first-party services, but also through the breadth of third-party services that they need to run their businesses. It's not a new concept for AWS, and we're trying to make it easier on our customers to take advantage of all of that innovation.
Just very quickly, are you seeing more SMEs kind of take note now? We're trying to move beyond sort of the biggest companies thinking about their access to compute and the software that they're using.
Absolutely. I mean, small and medium enterprises are continuing to be a high growth engine for technology adoption. I wouldn't say that they've been laggards, but they are now certainly moving faster. It is easier for them to take advantage of it. And so we are working directly with those customers. We are working through many of our channel partners to reach those customers and help them adopt innovation that's available in the cloud. And so we'll continue to see that. We're going to continue to build services with them, for them, and with our partners.
Ruba Borno, VP of Worldwide Channels and Alliances at AWS. Busy time, we thank you. Now, it's been a busy time for the show as well. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. So many market moves. More guests to come, Ed.
Yeah, tomorrow we're going to be joined by Waymo co-CEO Takendra Manakar for an exclusive interview. A lot of data points coming out of Waymo and a lot of questions to ask about the ongoing tie-up with Alphabet, parent of Google. Don't forget also to check out the podcast. You know where to find it on the Bloomberg terminal, as well as online on Apple, Spotify, and iHeart. From the team out in New York City and all the team here in San Francisco, this is Bloomberg Technology.